The steel-toed boots echoed against the cold concrete floor of Camp Jefferson at 0430 hours. Each step a hammer blow of authority in the pre-dawn darkness. Drill Sergeant Wallace's shadow stretched long and menacing across the women's barracks before his voice shattered the silence. "Up and at 'em, waste of space!" His bellow was followed by the violent kick against the bottom bunk, where Sarah Morgan lay curled beneath a threadbare blanket. The sound reverberated through the room like a gunshot, causing several recruits to jolt awake with startled gasps. Sarah sat up slowly, her slight frame barely making an impression on the military-issue mattress. Brown hair fell across her pale face, thin shoulders visibly trembling in the chill that permeated the concrete building. The temperature control systems in the barracks, originally designed in the 1980s for the first wave of Special Forces training at Jefferson, had failed again overnight. "I'm talking to you, civilian," Wallace roared, yanking the blanket away with violent force. The nervous laughter that rippled through the room was immediate and cruel. 20 other female recruits watched with a mixture of relief and malicious pleasure. Better her than them. Jessica Hammer Blackwell descended from the top bunk with practiced efficiency. At 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, she was a physical specimen that recruiting posters dreamed of. The muscles in her arms flexed as she landed on the floor with barely a sound, an impressive feat for someone who weighed north of 180 pounds of pure strength. "Why don't you go back to the homeless shelter where you belong?" Hammer whispered, her voice carrying just enough to make several nearby recruits snicker. She delivered a sharp elbow to Sarah's ribs as she passed, the casual cruelty of it practiced, imprecise. Sarah absorbed the blow without complaint, her eyes fixed downward as she struggled to her feet. Her standard-issue PT uniform hung loose on her slender frame, making her appear even smaller than her 5'4" stature. The other recruits had already begun their morning routines with military precision, but Sarah's movements seemed hesitant, unfamiliar with the choreography of military life. In the doorway, a figure appeared. Drill Sergeant Wallace snapped to attention, his previous aggression instantly transformed into rigid military bearing. "Officer on deck." The barracks fell silent as Colonel Victor Harrington stepped into the harsh, fluorescent light. At 55, Harrington carried the weathered look of a man who had seen too much combat and not enough peace. His salt and pepper hair was cropped in a regulation cut that hadn't changed in 30 years. A campaign ribbon from Desert Storm sat among the impressive display on his chest, a visual history of American military interventions from Panama to Afghanistan. The SR-9 surveillance camera in the corner of the barracks tracked his movement. The system, developed from NSA technology and only recently declassified for military training purposes, recorded everything in high definition, its data feeding directly to the command center. Every recruit knew they were being watched, evaluated, judged every moment of every day. Harrington's ice blue eyes scanned the room before settling on Sarah with undisguised revulsion. Something in his gaze shifted when he looked at her, not just the standard contempt reserved for new recruits, but something personal, something darker. "Morgan." His voice sliced through the air like a combat knife. "Combat evaluation at 0600. I suggest you prepare for elimination." A cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth as he turned and departed, leaving behind a silence thick with anticipation. The message was clear to everyone: Sarah Morgan wouldn't survive the day. 15 minutes to formation, Wallace barked, following Harrington out. As the recruits rushed to prepare, Sarah caught a glimpse of a figure outside the window. Lieutenant Michael Chen, the quiet intelligence officer who seemed to materialize throughout the camp at odd hours, was standing in the shadows watching the barracks with unusual intensity. His tac pad, a military-grade tablet with Delta-level security clearance, glowed softly in his hands as he made notes. When he noticed Sarah looking, he quickly disappeared into the darkness. "Don't worry about making your bunk, tourist," Hammer called out. "You won't be needing it after today." Sarah kept her head down, her hands moving with deliberate clumsiness as she assembled her gear. Her standard-issue M4A1 carbine, which the other recruits handled with growing confidence, looked awkward and unwieldy in her grasp. She fumbled with the magazine, nearly dropping it, earning another round of snickers. The only person who didn't laugh was Laura Martinez, a quiet recruit with sharp eyes who had bunked across from Sarah since their arrival 3 weeks ago. Laura watched as Sarah struggled, her expression thoughtful rather than mocking. The morning air bit at exposed skin as the recruits filed onto the training ground. Sarah limped slightly, her discount store boots, obviously not military issue, flapping at the soles with each step. 3 weeks ago, she'd arrived at Camp Jefferson with nothing but a battered duffel bag, held together with duct tape, immediately becoming the target of every joke and cruel impulse that military culture sometimes breeds in its darker corners. The Night Stalker thermal imaging system mounted on the perimeter fence tracked the heat signatures of the recruits as they assembled in formation. The technology capable of detecting a human heartbeat through concrete walls was part of the advanced security measures that made Camp Jefferson more than just a training facility. It was a proving ground for next-generation warfare. As Sarah took her place at the end of the formation, a weathered figure emerged from the armory building. Sergeant First Class Frank Reynolds moved with the deliberate gait of a man who had spent too many years carrying heavy packs through hostile territory. At 65, he was a relic from another era of warfare, Desert Storm Somalia. The early days of Afghanistan kept on as the armory manager long past standard retirement age. His knowledge of weapon systems spanning 4 decades made him too valuable to lose. Frank's eyes, sharp despite his age, tracked Sarah for a moment longer than necessary. Unlike the contempt or amusement others showed her, his gaze held something else: calculation, assessment, a weighing of possibilities. As the formation stood at rigid attention, Frank disappeared back into the armory, the heavy reinforced door closing behind him with the distinctive sound of multiple locks engaging. The morning sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the training grounds in shades of blood and shadow. Colonel Harrington reappeared on the elevated review platform, his figure silhouetted against the dawn sky like an avenging angel, his voice carried across the field with practiced command. Today separates the soldiers from the civilians. Combat evaluation begins in 30 minutes. Prepare yourselves. His eyes found Sarah again with that same peculiar intensity. The morning wind carried his final words with perfect clarity. Some of you clearly don't belong here. The evaluation will prove it. The combat ring stood at the center of the training ground, a 20-foot circle bordered by ropes that had absorbed the sweat and blood of thousands of recruits before this class. The sand inside, imported from the same quarry that supplied material for Special Forces desert training, shifted underfoot, deliberately uneven to simulate combat conditions. First pair Morgan and Blackwell, Drill Sergeant Wallace announced with barely concealed satisfaction. A murmur ran through the assembled recruits. Hammer was the top hand-to-hand combatant in the class. Sarah was, well, Sarah. The matchup wasn't just unfair, it was punitive. Sarah stepped into the ring, her movements hesitant. Across from her, Hammer cracked her knuckles with theatrical menace, her muscular frame blocking the morning sun. Rules are simple, Wallace barked. Submission or knockout, begin when ready. This won't take long, Hammer announced to appreciative chuckles from the other recruits. She advanced with confident steps, her stance perfect textbook Special Forces combatives. Colonel Harrington watched from the edge of the training ground, his arms crossed, expression unreadable. Beside him, Chen had appeared again, his tac pad activated and recording. Hammer struck first a textbook jab designed to test Sarah's reflexes. Sarah flinched away rather than properly blocking, drawing derisive laughter. Hammer followed with a combination that would have impressed her instructors, each move executed with power and precision. What happened next was subtle enough that most missed it. As Hammer launched a devastating right cross, Sarah didn't dodge dramatically or counterattack. She simply shifted her weight, pivoting on her back foot in a way that sent Hammer's momentum carrying her past fists, hitting nothing but air. The movement wasn't standard Army combatives program. It was something else, a technique that belonged more to Krav Maga than military training. For a split second, Sarah's body had moved with an economy of motion that seemed impossible for someone supposedly unfamiliar with combat. Chen's fingers flew across his tac pad, documenting something the others couldn't see. The way Sarah's feet never crossed, how her breathing remained controlled despite her apparent panic, the micro adjustments that kept her perfectly balanced while appearing to stumble. "Fight back, coward," someone yelled from the crowd. Laura Martinez, watching from the sidelines with worried eyes, was the only one who noticed the flicker of calculation that crossed Sarah's face before she deliberately stumbled backward. Hammer pressed her advantage, landing a brutal punch to Sarah's stomach that doubled her over with a harsh wheeze. The crowd's approval was immediate and vocal. "These pathetic and all," Harrington called out, his voice carrying an edge of something that might have been disappointment. Or was it anticipation? "Finish her." Hammer wound up for the knockout blow, a haymaker that would have sent anyone to the infirmary. But at the last second, Sarah twisted her torso in a movement so fluid it looked like water flowing around rock. Hammer's fist whistled past her ear, and the larger woman's momentum sent her crashing face first into the sand. The training ground fell silent. Hammer scrambled to her feet, face flushed with humiliation and rage. This time she approached more carefully, throwing calculated jabs that Sarah barely avoided, each dodge looking more desperate than the last. To the crowd, it appeared she was simply delaying the inevitable. But Chen's pen moved faster across his notes, documenting what the others didn't see. Sarah wasn't fighting. She was analyzing, cataloging Hammer's patterns, deliberately losing in a very specific way. "Enough playing around," Harrington barked, suddenly real anger in his voice. "This is combat training, not a dance recital. Blackwell, take her down or you're both out." The threat galvanized Hammer into action. She rushed forward with a roar, abandoning technique for brute force. Sarah backpedaled, tripped over her own feet, or seemed to, and went down hard. Hammer pounced, ready to rain down punches. But Sarah's legs came up at the perfect angle, catching the larger woman in the stomach and using her own momentum to flip her overhead. Hammer hit the ground with a sound like a sack of concrete dropping from height. Silence fell over the training ground. Then Wallace forced out a laugh. "Blind luck. Even a broken clock is right twice a day." But Harrington wasn't laughing. His face had gone still, watchful, like a hunter who just caught a glimpse of unexpected prey. "Morgan's fam," he said quietly, and something in his tone made everyone lean in. "Where did you say you were from?" Sarah pushed herself to her feet, keeping her head down. "Nowhere special, sir. Just around." Her voice was small, breathy, nothing like the commanding tone she'd almost let slip when Hammer had her cornered. "Around," Harrington repeated, tasting the word like poison. His eyes narrowed, focusing on Sarah's wrist, where her sleeve had ridden up, revealing a glimpse of a strange V-shaped scar, too precise to be accidental. Sarah quickly tugged her sleeve down, but not before Chen had captured an image of the mark with his tack pad. As Sarah limped away from the combat circle, Laura caught up with her, offering a water bottle. "That was unexpected," she said quietly. Sarah took the water with a mumbled thanks, careful to keep her left wrist uncovered. What none of the recruits noticed was the Garmin Tactics Delta Solar Tactical Watch, partially hidden under her sleeve, a military-grade device with advanced biometric tracking developed for Special Forces operatives. The device's titanium casing and sapphire crystal had survived countless missions, still providing critical physiological data despite its worn appearance. "Lucky move," Sarah muttered, not meeting Laura's eyes. "I've never seen anyone counter Hammer like that," Laura persisted. "Almost like you've had training." Sarah's shoulders hunched defensively. "Just street smarts. When you grow up, where I did you learn to handle yourself?" Before Laura could respond, Chen appeared beside them, his movements silent despite the gravel underfoot. Another trait that separated intelligence officers from regular military. "Morgan, Colonel Harrington wants a word with you." Now, as Sarah followed Chen across the training ground, a brief memory flashed through her mind: blinding desert sun, the taste of blood and sand, the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire, and Harrington's voice crackling through a radio. "Confirm elimination. I repeat, confirm elimination." She blinked the memory away, forcing her posture back into the slouch of an uncertain recruit, rather than the combat-ready stance that 16 years of military service had ingrained in her body. Behind them, Frank Reynolds emerged from the armory, ostensibly to deliver a crate of training weapons for the next drill. His eyes tracked Sarah and Chen until they disappeared into the administration building, his weathered face giving nothing away. The Camp Jefferson mess hall at lunch was a study in military hierarchy. The long tables arranged with precision, the serving line moving with practiced efficiency, the unspoken rules about who sat where, all of it designed to reinforce order and structure. Sarah sat alone at the furthest table, her tray holding the meager scraps left after everyone else had gone through the line. She ate mechanically, eyes unfocused, seemingly lost in her surroundings. That's when Sergeant Marcus Stone decided to make his move. As Hammer's closest ally and the self-appointed enforcer of the recruit pecking order, he couldn't let the morning's humiliation stand. "Hey, tourists." He swaggered over with his crew, each step calculated for maximum intimidation. "This ain't the soup kitchen. Real soldiers eat here. With deliberate cruelty, he knocked her tray off the table, sending what little food she had splattering across the floor. Oops, his smile was all teeth. Guess you'll have to lick it up like the dog you are. The entire mess hall erupted in laughter. Even some of the drill instructors smirked, turning blind eyes to the hazing, a tradition as old as military training itself. Sarah knelt to clean up the mess, movements precise and economical. When Laura tried to help, Wallace barked at her to sit down. Let the tourist clean up her own mess, he said loudly. Maybe she'll learn to hold on to things better. As Sarah wiped up the spilled food, her hands moved with an efficiency that spoke of practice, not at cleaning, but at completing tasks under hostile observation. When she stood, Laura managed to slip her half a protein bar, the small act of kindness nearly invisible in the chaos of the mess hall. Thanks, Sarah whispered. Something in her expression softened briefly as she looked at Laura. Not everyone here has forgotten basic humanity. I grew up with 5 brothers, Laura replied with a slight smile. I know bullying when I see it. Frank Reynolds sat at the instructor's table watching the scene unfold. Unlike the others, he wasn't laughing. His eyes narrowed slightly when Stone knocked Sarah's tray away, his weathered hand tightening almost imperceptibly around his coffee mug. After lunch, Sarah found herself alone in the equipment shed inventorying radio gear as punishment detail for her clumsiness in the mess hall. The shed's metal walls amplified the afternoon heat to nearly unbearable levels, sweat soaking through her uniform within minutes. The door opened with a metallic groan, and Frank stepped inside, closing it behind him. He carried a canteen, which he offered without comment. Sarah hesitated before accepting it. Drink, he said gruffly. Heat exhaustion's no joke, even for someone who's spent time in the desert. Sarah froze for a fraction of a second before taking a careful sip. The water was ice cold, a luxury at Camp Jefferson. I don't know what you mean, Sergeant, she said, handing back the canteen. Frank leaned against a shelf stacked with the outdated PRC-117G tactical radios. Berlin, 1987, he said conversationally. Operation Keyhole. 3 agents extracted from East Germany, 1 KGB mole identified in the process. The mole used a specific radio frequency to communicate, one that wasn't in any manual. He paused. Do you know what frequency that was, Morgan? Sarah continued inventorying her movements, deliberately clumsy, as she checked off items on her clipboard. I wasn't even born in 1987, Sergeant. 137.4 MHz, Frank continued as if she hadn't spoken. Non-standard. You'd only know it if you'd been briefed on Cold War operations. He studied her reaction carefully. Or if you were part of the Ghost Eagle program. Sarah's hands stilled for just a moment, barely perceptible unless you were looking for it. Frank was. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice had hardened slightly, the fearful recruit persona slipping. Frank moved closer, speaking low enough that even if the shed was bugged, which it almost certainly was, his words wouldn't carry. I've been here long enough to see patterns, Morgan, and Harrington's interest in you isn't normal. Be careful. Before Sarah could respond, the door banged open and Wallace appeared, his face twisted in a scowl. Reynolds Colonel wants to see you. Morgan, you're due at the Gauntlet in 5 minutes. Move your ass. Frank departed without another word, but his warning hung in the air like smoke. Sarah finished her inventory with deliberate slowness, her mind racing despite her outwardly calm demeanor. The Gauntlet stood as the ultimate test of Camp Jefferson's training regimen, a hellish obstacle course designed to break bodies and spirits in equal measure. Recruits lined up at the start, eyeing the series of walls, ropes, mud pits, and barbed wire obstacles that stretched out like a portal to hell. Listen up, Harrington commanded, his presence somehow more intense than usual. This is where we separate the soldiers from the civilians. Fail here and you're gone. No second chances, no excuses. His eyes found Sarah in the lineup. Some of you don't belong here. The Gauntlet will prove it. They win in waves. First up were the top performers, Stone and his crew blazing through with competitive times. Hammer powering over obstacles through sheer strength. Then came the middle pack, struggling but determined. Finally, Sarah's group, the bottom feeders, the ones everyone expected to wash out. Sarah approached the first obstacle, a 12-foot wall that required either exceptional upper body strength or perfect technique. She took a running start, and just as she was about to grab the top, Wallace appeared beside the wall and kicked the boarding plank away. Oops, he said with false innocence. Guess you'll have to do it the hard way, tourist. The wall was nearly impossible for someone Sarah's size. She jumped fingers, barely grazing the top before sliding back down. The crowd jeered. She tried again this time, getting a better grip, but her hands were slick with sweat and possibly blood from earlier attempts. On the third try, something shifted in her approach. Instead of going straight at it, she hit the wall at an angle using her feet to run up the side for extra height, a parkour technique that definitely wasn't in any marine manual. She made it over, landing in a controlled roll on the other side that she immediately made look awkward and painful. Chen made another notation on his tack pad, his expression thoughtful. Harrington's jaw tightened. The rope climb was next a 30-foot ascent that had claimed more recruits than any other obstacle. Sarah gripped the thick rope, and for a moment her hands moved to wrap it around her leg in a specific pattern, the same way combat climbers secure themselves for fast rope operations. She caught herself deliberately fumbling the grip and climbing slowly, arduously, like someone who'd never done this before. Halfway up, Hammer appeared at the adjacent rope. Having trouble, tourist? She began violently, shaking Sarah's rope, trying to dislodge her. Maybe you should just let go. Save everyone the trouble of watching you fail. Sarah's hands were bleeding now, leaving red smears on the rope, but she held on inch by inch, making progress despite the sabotage. When she finally reached the top, Harrington was there on the platform, standing too close to be coincidental. "You're bleeding all over my equipment," he said quietly, voice pitched so only she could hear. "Getting blood on things that don't belong to you. Just like before, right?" For the first time, Sarah's mask slipped. Her eyes snapped up to meet his, and for a fraction of a second there was something dangerous in them, a cold calculation that belonged to battlefields, not training courses. Then it was gone, replaced by the usual frightened submission. "I don't know what you mean, sir." "Don't you?" "Oh." Harrington leaned closer, and there was something almost desperate in his intensity. "You look familiar, Morgan. Like someone I used to know. Someone who should be dead." The moment stretched between them, taut as the rope in Sarah's bloody hands. Then Wallace's whistle blew from below, breaking the spell. "Move it, Morgan. Other recruits are waiting." The descent was where Sarah made her mistake, or what looked like a mistake. Her foot slipped on a blood slick, and suddenly she was falling. Not the controlled drop of someone who knew how to fall, but a genuine plummet that sent her crashing into the mud from 15 feet up. She hit hard, body crumpling in a way that made even the cruel spectators wince. "Medic!" Laura shouted, starting forward, but Wallace blocked her path. "She's fine, aren't you, tourist?" He loomed over Sarah's still form. "Get up or get out." For long seconds, Sarah didn't move. Harrington had descended from the platform and now stood watching with an expression that was hard to read: anticipation, fear, hope that she was finally broken. And then slowly, painfully, Sarah pushed herself up. Mud covered half her face. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, and her left arm hung at an angle that suggested serious damage. I'm okay, oh," she wheezed, cradling her arm. "I can continue." "Sir, she needs medical attention," Chen interjected, stepping forward with uncharacteristic assertiveness. "That arm could be broken." Harrington rounded on him. "Did I ask for your opinion, Lieutenant? The recruit says she's fine." He turned back to Sarah, his smile all teeth. "Though if you want to quit, Morgan, now's your chance. Medical discharge. No shame in admitting you don't belong here." Sarah straightened, mud and blood making her look like something out of a war zone. With her good hand, she reached for her injured arm and in one swift motion popped what was clearly a dislocated shoulder back into place. Several recruits turned green. Hammer took an involuntary step back. "I don't quit, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Permission to continue the course." Something flickered in Harrington's eyes. Was it recognition? Fear? He nodded slowly. "By all means, Morgan. Continue." From the edge of the training ground, Frank watched with narrowed eyes. The self-reduction of a dislocated shoulder was not something civilians knew how to do. It was a skill taught to operators who might find themselves injured behind enemy lines with no medical support. The rest of the gauntlet passed in a blur of pain and determination. Sarah crawled through mud under barbed wire, her injured arm dragging uselessly. She scaled cargo nets, one-handed cross-balance beams through sheer will, and completed tasks that should have been impossible in her condition. And through it all, Harrington watched with growing intensity, his usual commanding presence replaced by something that looked almost like panic. As the sun began to set, painting the training ground in shades of blood and shadow, the surviving recruits gathered for evening formation. Sarah stood at the end of the line, swaying slightly, but still upright. Her uniform was destroyed, more mud and blood than fabric. Her arm was swollen to twice its normal size. But she stood at attention, eyes forward, refusing to break. "Pathetic display today," Wallace announced, prowling the ranks. "Half of you won't make it through the week." His eyes found Sarah. "And some of you shouldn't have made it through today." That night after lights out, Sarah lay in her bunk, trying not to move her injured arm. The other recruits gave her a wide berth, as if failure might be contagious. Only Laura risked stopping by her bunk, pressing a cold pack into her hand. "Why do you take it?" Laura whispered, glancing around to make sure no instructors were near. "The hazing, the abuse, it's beyond normal, even for boot camp. It's like they want you dead." Sarah was quiet for so long, Laura thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, barely audible, "Sometimes the best hunters pretend to be prey." Laura frowned, not understanding. "What does that mean?" "It means there are wolves in sheep's clothing here," Sarah murmured. "And sometimes you need a wolf to catch a wolf." Laura studied her face in the dim light. "You're not what you seem, are you?" "None of us are," Sarah replied, closing her eyes. "Get some sleep, Laura. Tomorrow won't be any easier." Laura returned to her own bunk, troubled by the cryptic exchange. Around them, the barracks settled into uneasy quiet, broken only by occasional snores and the distant sound of Humvees patrolling the perimeter. At 0300 hours, the door to the barracks opened silently. A figure slipped inside, moving with practiced stealth towards Sarah's bunk in the darkness. It was impossible to identify who it was, but they carried something, a key ring, that jingled softly as they approached. They paused at Sarah's bunk, looking down at her still form, then continued to the equipment lockers at the far end of the barracks. From her bunk, Sarah's eyes opened, just a sliver, watching the intruder's silhouette against the faint emergency lighting. The figure spent several minutes at her locker before slipping out as silently as they had entered. Sarah's hand moved to her shoulder fingers, tracing the outline of a tattoo hidden beneath her t-shirt, a stylized eagle with talons extended. The number 7 worked into the design of its wings. The mark of Ghost Eagle Team 7, a Delta Force unit officially listed as KIA during Operation Blackstorm in Afghanistan 2019. Her eyes remained open long after the intruder had gone, staring at the ceiling as she mentally prepared for what was coming. The hunt was entering its final phase, and soon hunter and prey would reverse roles. She just had to survive long enough to spring the trap. The pre-dawn light filtered weakly through the barracks windows as Sarah eased herself out of bed, every movement a calculated exercise in pain management. Her shoulder, though properly reduced, had swollen to an angry purple mass overnight. The kind of injury that would send most recruits to the infirmary and possibly end their military career. Sarah had endured worse, much worse. She made her way to the showers before the others woke, unwilling to risk anyone seeing the eagle tattoo on her shoulder blade. The cold water hit her injured body like needles of ice, but she welcomed the pain. It cleared her mind, focused her thoughts on what was to come. "Jesus Christ," a voice said behind her. Sarah turned quickly, instinctively covering her shoulder with her hand. Frank Reynolds stood in the doorway of the shower room, a first aid kit in his weathered hands. At this hour, the women's facilities were supposed to be off limits to male staff, but Frank had never been one for protocol when it interfered with practical matters. "That needs proper attention," he said, nodding toward her shoulder, "unless you want to lose mobility permanently." Sarah hesitated, then reached for her towel, careful to keep her back turned. "I'm fine, Sergeant." "Like hell you are." Frank set the first aid kit on a bench and opened it, revealing not standard issue medical supplies, but a specialized trauma kit with military-grade analgesics and anti-inflammatories. "I've patched up worse in the field, but even Delta operators need proper medical care." Sarah's head snapped up, eyes instantly alert despite her exhaustion. Frank met her gaze without flinching. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the frightened recruit persona had vanished entirely. In its place stood a hardened operator assessing a potential threat. Frank's laugh was dry as desert sand. "Save it. I've been running the armory at this base for 8 years. Before that, I was training Delta Force snipers for 15. I know the tattoo, and I damn well know how to reset a dislocated shoulder properly." He pulled out a tube of military-grade analgesic cream. Now let me see that before you compromise your mission by becoming genuinely incapacitated. For a long moment, Sarah didn't move. Then decision made, she sat on the bench and allowed Frank to examine her shoulder. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, the kind that comes from treating wounds under fire. Third-degree AC joint separation. You're lucky it went back in clean. He applied the cream with careful precision. Though luck had nothing to do with it, that was textbook SOCOM field reduction. How long have you known, Sarah asked quietly, since your second day, the way you field stripped your M4 during weapons familiarization? Your hands knew what to do before your brain could tell them to fumble it. Frank began wrapping her shoulder with a compression bandage. The question is, what's a supposedly dead ghost eagle doing playing recruit at Jefferson? Sarah's silence was answer enough. Frank tied off the bandage with a practiced knot. The M40A5 is a remarkable piece of machinery, he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, rather than one of the military's most advanced sniper rifles. .308 caliber 10-round detachable box magazine. Effective range of 1,000 yards in the right hands. He closed the medical kit. But the real magic is in the adjustments. Most people don't realize that the scope mounting system requires precise torque settings. 5-inch pounds for the base, screws 17 for the ring screws. Apply too much pressure, and you'll warp the scope tube. Too little and the recoil will knock your zero off after a few shots. Sarah recognized the tradecraft for what it was, establishing bona fides without explicitly stating classified information that might be overheard. I always preferred the MK-12 Special Purpose Rifle myself, she replied carefully. Lower profile in urban environments. Frank nodded, satisfied. Your gear was tampered with last night. Someone doesn't want you to make it through today's exercises. I noticed. There's more. Frank lowered his voice further. Harrington's been making calls on a secure line that doesn't route through standard military channels, and he's requisitioned live ammunition for today's exercise without proper authorization. Used my sign-off code, but I never approved it. Sarah's eyes narrowed. How did he access your codes? That's the question, isn't it? Someone's been in the system creating false authorizations, bypassing security protocols. Frank stood. You're hunting Harrington. Question is why? Before Sarah could answer, the door to the shower room banged open. Wallace stood there, face twisted in his perpetual scowl. What the hell are you doing in the women's facility, Reynolds? He demanded. Frank held up the first aid kit. Medical assistance. Morgan took a bad fall yesterday. Didn't authorize any medical treatment, Wallace snapped. Fortunately, 30 years of combat medicine trumps your authorization. Frank's voice had a dangerous edge that made Wallace take an involuntary step back. She'll be ready for duty in 20 minutes. Frank departed, leaving Sarah alone with Wallace, who sneered at her. Enjoying special treatment, tourist, don't get used to it. After he left, Sarah quickly dressed, her mind racing. Frank was either an unexpected ally or a sophisticated plant to test her cover. Either way, she needed to be prepared for what was coming. When she returned to her bunk to prepare for morning formation, she found disaster. Her M4 carbine had been disassembled and the firing pin removed. Her body armor, standard issue IOTV, with ceramic plates, had been sliced with what looked like a combat knife, rendering it useless. Her Danner Reckoning combat boots had been filled with a mixture of sand and what smelled like military-grade epoxy adhesive. Morgan! Wallace's voice boomed across the equipment room. What the hell did you do to your gear? Sarah stared at the destruction, her face carefully blank. I don't know, sir. It was fine last night. Carelessness with military equipment is grounds for immediate dismissal, Harrington said, appearing as if he had been waiting for this moment. He picked up the damaged armor, examining the cuts with theatrical disgust. This is thousands of dollars of taxpayer property destroyed because you can't take care of your things. Sir, someone else. Sarah started, then stopped herself. Someone else. What? Harrington stepped closer, invading her personal space. Are you accusing fellow Marines of sabotage? That's a serious allegation, Morgan. Better have proof if you're going down that road. The equipment room had filled with other recruits drawn by the commotion. They watched with a mixture of sympathy and relief. Better her than them. No excuse, sir, Sarah said, finally, eyes downcast. I take full responsibility. Damn right you do, Wallace interjected. You'll be working this off in extra duties for the next month, if you last that long. As Sarah gathered her ruined equipment, she noticed something else. A small item tucked inside her damaged boot. A challenge coin, old and worn with an emblem. She recognized an eagle with outstretched talons. The number 7 worked into the design. Her hand closed around it quickly, hiding it from view. Someone knew. Someone here knew exactly who she was. Morgan, Harrington's voice snapped her back to attention. Since your gear is compromised, you'll use the reserve equipment for today's exercise. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Report to the armory in 10 minutes, full combat load. After Harrington and Wallace departed, Laura approached, keeping her voice low. Someone's targeting you specifically, Sarah. This isn't normal hazing. I noticed, Sarah replied, slipping the challenge coin into her pocket. Why, what did you do to piss them off? Sarah shouldered her damaged gear. Maybe it's not what I did. Maybe it's what I know. Laura studied her, making a decision. Look, I don't know what's going on, but I've got your back. My father was Special Forces. I recognize the signs. You're not just some washout. Sarah's expression revealed nothing, but she gave Laura a slight nod of acknowledgement. Be careful who you trust here, Laura. Not everyone is who they seem. Across the training ground, Lieutenant Chen stood in the shadow of the administration building, watching the exchange through high-powered binoculars. He spoke quietly into his secure comm unit. Eagle's Nest has been compromised. Moving to secure position Alpha. The morning's training was announced with unusual fanfare. The recruits gathered at the central parade ground, where Harrington stood on the elevated platform, his posture radiating authority. Listen up, he commanded, his voice carrying across the parade ground. Today, we're doing something special. Live fire exercises in Training Area Sierra. A ripple of excitement mixed with fear ran through the ranks. Live fire exercises were usually reserved for advanced training, not basic. This is where we separate the real soldiers from the wannabes, Harrington continued. This isn't paintball, people. This is as close to actual combat as you'll get without deploying. The exercise simulates a hostile territory insertion. You'll be divided into fire teams, navigate to your objective, and neutralize pop-up targets. Laura shot Sarah a worried look, but there was no time for discussion as they were ordered to gear up. Sarah made her way to the armory where Frank waited with a set of replacement gear. Standard issue M4 IOTV, with plates and boots, he said loudly for anyone listening, then voice dropping to a whisper as he handed her the rifle. I've checked it personally. Also, you might want to adjust the insole of the right boot. Feels a bit stiff. Sarah nodded imperceptibly, understanding the message. When she was alone in the changing area, she quickly examined the boot. Tucked into a hidden compartment in the custom insole was a small TSCM device, technical surveillance countermeasure, designed to detect and jam listening devices. Beside it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a Sig Sauer P226 in .40 caliber, the standard sidearm of Delta Force with a full magazine. She quickly secured both items, ensuring they were hidden from casual inspection. Whatever was coming, Frank had just significantly improved her odds. The transport trucks that would take them to Training Area Sierra were already idling when Sarah joined the other recruits. As they loaded in, she noticed several things wrong. First, there were more instructors than usual, and some faces she didn't recognize, men who moved like operators rather than drill sergeants. Second, the route they were taking led away from the standard training areas into a section of woods marked on maps as restricted access. Third, Harrington wrote in the lead vehicle braking protocol that said the commanding officer should remain at base during live fire drills. You look like you're mapping escape routes, Laura whispered from beside her in the transport. What's going on, Sarah? And don't give me that I don't know bullshit. You know something. Sarah studied Laura carefully. Either the woman was genuinely concerned or she was an exceptionally good plant. Keep your head down today, she finally said. Stay close to me, and if things go sideways, do exactly what I tell you without question. What do you mean if things go sideways? It's just a training exercise. Sarah's gaze shifted to the men in the front of the transport, the unfamiliar instructors with their too alert postures and concealed sidearms that weren't standard military issue. No, she said quietly, it's not. Training Area Sierra was a densely wooded section of the base that butted up against the northern perimeter. Unlike the manicured training grounds near the main compound, Sierra was wild old-growth forest with limited visibility and challenging terrain, perfect for an ambush. The truck stopped at a small clearing where Harrington addressed the assembled recruits one final time. Rules are simple. Each team moves through the woods to the designated checkpoint. Pop-up targets will appear. Hit them before they hit you. He paused, a strange smile crossing his face. For most of you, safety gear on at all times. Any questions? Sir, one recruit raised a hand. What do you mean, most of us? Some targets will return fire with sim rounds, Harrington explained. Non-lethal, but they'll hurt like hell. Consider it motivation to shoot first and accurately. As the teams dispersed into the woods, Sarah noticed the instructors she didn't recognize spreading out in a pattern that looked less like safety oversight and more like a tactical net. Her hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder, where beneath the fabric, the eagle tattoo seemed to burn with remembered heat. Stay close, she murmured to Laura, her voice different now, lower, more authoritative. Something's wrong here. In the command post overlooking training area, Sierra Lieutenant Chen knelt beside a secure communications unit, speaking rapidly into the headset. Confirmed, Harrington has contracted at least 6 independent operators. They're positioning for interlocking fields of fire across the training area. Back in the armory, Frank Reynolds moved with swift efficiency, unlocking a weapons cabinet that hadn't been opened in years. Inside was a collection of specialized equipment that officially didn't exist at Camp Jefferson, a contingency cache for exactly this type of situation. I need a team at coordinates 344712 northern sector of Sierra. Chen continued over the secure line. Full tactical response weapons, hot. In the forest, Sarah's team, consisting of herself, Laura, and 2 of the weakest male recruits, moved cautiously through the underbrush. Sarah had taken point despite her injury, her movements having changed completely. The clumsy recruit was gone, replaced by someone who moved through the forest like smoke. Laura noticed but said nothing, too focused on not tripping over roots in the dim light. The forest was eerily quiet, the natural sounds of birds and insects absent. A trained operator would recognize the silence immediately. The wildlife had been disturbed by multiple armed individuals moving into position. The first target popped up 50 meters ahead. The 2 male recruits in their group fired wildly, paintballs splattering trees, nowhere near the mark. Laura managed to wing it on her 3rd shot. Sarah hadn't fired at all. Her weapon held it ready, but unfired. Morgan, what the hell are you doing? One of the males hissed. Shoot. But Sarah was listening to something else. The forest itself. The birds had gone quiet. In the distance, a branch snapped with the weight of something heavier than local wildlife. Her eyes tracked movement in the shadows that didn't match the pattern of other recruit teams. Get down! Sarah suddenly commanded, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone used to being obeyed in life or death situations. The others instinctively dropped just as the first real shot rang out. It wasn't a paintball or even a sim round. The crack of a rifle firing live ammunition is unmistakable to anyone who's heard it. The tree next to Laura's head exploded in a shower of splinters. She screamed, dropping flat as training kicked in. What the hell? Stay down, everyone down. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos with commanding authority. More shots followed, walking in systematic patterns through their position. This wasn't hazing or aggressive training. This was an execution. What's happening? Laura gasped, pressing herself against the earth as bullets whined overhead. Sarah's mind raced, calculating angles, counting shooters. At least 4 positioned to cut off retreat. Professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire. These weren't instructors playing soldier. These were killers, and Harrington had led her right to them. Listen carefully, Sarah said, her voice calm despite the chaos. When I say move, you run for that fallen log at 2 o'clock. Stay low. Zigzag pattern. Don't stop for anything. But what about move? Sarah rose from cover, her paintball rifle suddenly spitting rounds with mechanical precision. Not at the pop-up targets, but at the muzzle flashes in the trees where the shooters were concealed. Not expecting return fire, they ducked reflexively. It bought seconds, but seconds were all Sarah needed. Her team scrambled for the log as she covered them, moving and shooting with an economy of motion that belonged on a battlefield, not a training ground. One of the hidden shooters made the mistake of breaking cover to get a better angle. Sarah's paintball caught him center mass, a non-lethal round that nevertheless marked his position for what came next. She rolled behind a tree just as return fire chewed up the ground where she'd been standing. From her new position, she could see Laura and the others had made it to relative safety, but they were still pinned down and the shooters were adjusting position for a better angle. That's when Harrington's voice crackled over someone's radio, close enough for Sarah to hear. Confirm the target. I need visual confirmation before we finish this. Target singular. This wasn't about eliminating weak recruits. This was about eliminating her. Harrington knew. Somehow he'd figured out who she was, and he was trying to finish what he'd started 3 years ago in a different desert under a different sky. Sarah's hand moved to her damaged shoulder fingers, finding the exact spot where shrapnel from an IED had torn through muscle and bone. The same IED that Harrington had mysteriously navigated his convoy around, leaving her unit to drive straight into the kill zone. 15 good operators dead because someone had sold their route to the enemy. And now the seller was trying to tie up his last loose end. A new sound cut through the gunfire, the distinctive thump of a grenade launcher. The explosive round hit 20 meters from the log where Laura sheltered, showering dirt and debris. Not close enough to kill, but the next one would be ranged in. Run. Sarah shouted, breaking cover again, but this time she didn't retreat. She charged toward the nearest shooter, using the trees for cover closing distance with frightening speed. The shooter, caught off guard by the aggressive move, swung his rifle to track her. Too slow. Sarah hit him low, driving a shoulder into his gut and following up with an elbow strike that dropped him cold. She grabbed his rifle, an M4 with live rounds, not the paintball gun she'd been issued, and immediately put rounds down range at the other positions. Ghost Eagle 7 engaging, she called out, using her old call sign deliberately. 3 years too late for a reunion, don't you think? The effect was immediate. The shooting stopped, replaced by frantic radio chatter. She heard Harrington's voice, higher now, stressed. Impossible. Ghost Eagle 7 is dead. I confirmed it myself. Did you? Sarah called back, moving position immediately after speaking. Or did you just confirm that you left me to die? Big difference, Commander. Laura and the others were using the distraction to move crawling through the underbrush toward what they hoped was safety, but Sarah could see what they couldn't. 2 more shooters moving to cut them off. She put controlled bursts in their direction, forcing them to cover. You should have stayed dead. Harrington's voice had lost all pretense of control now. Do you know what you cost me, what your survival meant? I know what my team's death meant, Sarah replied, flanking left to get a better angle. 15 million in blood money from the Haqqani network. How much did each life net you, Victor? 1 million per soul. More shooters were converging on her position now. She counted at least 6, probably more. Professional contractors, not the kind of muscle that came cheap. Harrington had invested serious resources in this cleanup operation, but he had made one mistake. He'd underestimated her. Again, just like he had 3 years ago. Sarah moved through the forest like death itself, using every trick learned in 16 years of special operations. She turned their numbers against them, forcing them to check fire to avoid hitting each other. She used the terrain, appearing where they didn't expect, vanishing before they could respond. And all the while, she kept them away from Laura and the recruits who were almost clear of the killing zone. But even ghosts can be cornered. A rifle butt caught her injured shoulder, spinning her around. She rolled with the impact, came up firing, but her magazine was empty. 3 shooters closed in, weapons trained. This was it. The execution Harrington had planned all along. That's when Laura screamed. One of the contractors had caught up with the fleeing recruits, his weapon aimed at the terrified group. The choice was instant and inevitable. Sarah threw her empty rifle at the nearest shooter and sprinted toward Laura, knowing she'd never make it in time. Knowing Harrington's men would cut her down before she made it 3 steps. The world exploded into chaos. Automatic weapons fire, but not from where she expected. The contractors threatening her were suddenly taking fire from the tree line. Professional shots that dropped 2 before they could react. The third spun, looking for the new threat, and Sarah put him down with a strike to the throat. CIA weapons down. Everyone freeze. Lieutenant Chen emerged from cover, M4 at ready, followed by a full squad of operators in tactical gear that bore no unit insignia. Each moved with the precision and confidence that only comes from years of covert operations. Colonel Harrington, you're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and the murder of 15 United States service members, Chen announced, his voice carrying through the forest. Harrington tried to run. After everything, the planning, The careful trap, the hired killers, he tried to run like a common criminal. Sarah intercepted him before he made it 10 meters, her tackle driving him face first into the dirt. "Hello, Commander," she said, pressing a knee into his back as Chen's team secured the other contractors. "Miss me?" He twisted to look at her, and she let him see everything, the eagle tattoo now visible through her torn shirt, the cold professionalism in her eyes, the soldier she'd always been beneath the frightened recruit act. "You're dead," he whispered, as if saying it could make it true. "I saw the report. KIA Operation Black Storm. No survivors." "Funny thing about reports," Sarah said as zip cuffs were applied to his wrists. "Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes a sniper survives an IED that takes out her convoy. Sometimes she drags 3 wounded teammates 8 clicks through hostile territory before the second ambush finishes them." Sarah stood wincing as she favored her injured shoulder. "Sometimes she spends 16 hours playing dead among the corpses of her unit, memorizing the voices of the attackers who knew exactly where to hit. Voices speaking Pashto and English." She leaned closer. "Your English, Victor." Laura approached cautiously, still trying to process what she was witnessing. "Sarah, what is this? Who are you?" Before Sarah could answer, Chen stepped forward. "Captain Sarah Morgan, Delta Force Ghost Eagle Team 7, officially killed in action 3 years ago during Operation Black Storm in Afghanistan." He holstered his weapon. "Unofficially the key witness in our investigation into one of the largest treason cases in modern military history." "Your CIA?" Laura asked, looking at Chen in disbelief. "Special Activities Division," Chen confirmed. "We've been building a case against Harrington and his network for the past year. Sarah's been working with us for the last 6 months." From his position on the ground, Harrington laughed bitterly. "6 months. She's been dead for 3 years." "Not dead," Sarah corrected. "Just deep undercover while we unraveled your network. Turns out selling American operations to the Haqqani network leaves quite a paper trail once we knew where to look." The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as a Black Hawk appeared overhead, hovering before setting down in a nearby clearing. A distinguished older man in General Stars stepped out, flanked by military police. "General Montgomery," Chen greeted him with a crisp salute. "Target secured." General William Montgomery, commander of Special Operations Command, surveyed the scene with practiced efficiency. His weathered face, lined with 30 years of command decisions, betrayed nothing of his thoughts until his eyes fell on Sarah. "Captain Morgan," he said, voice barely audible over the idling helicopter, "you're supposed to be dead." Sarah straightened to attention despite her injuries. "Sorry to disappoint, sir." "At ease before you fall over, Captain." Montgomery approached, studying her face as if seeing a ghost. 3 years we thought you were gone. Your family. Necessary operational security, sir," Sarah replied. "We couldn't risk Harrington discovering I'd survived." Montgomery nodded slowly, understanding the sacrifice she'd made. Then he turned to Harrington, still face down in the dirt, and his expression hardened. "Victor Harrington, I presided over the memorial service for Ghost Eagle Team 7. I presented flags to families who will never see their loved ones again." His voice shook with barely controlled fury. "And all that time, you were cashing checks from the same people who killed them." "You don't understand," Harrington said desperately. "It wasn't just the money. They promised influence power, a seat at the table when—" Montgomery cut him off with a gesture. "Save it for your court-martial. Though personally, I hope you end up in front of a civilian court. Military justice might be too merciful for what you've done." As military police secured Harrington and began processing the other contractors, Laura finally found her voice again. "I don't understand. This whole time, you were pretending—" Sarah gently guided Laura toward the medical helicopter that had just landed. "Not everything was pretense. I needed to be here to draw Harrington out. We needed him to try to eliminate me so we could catch him in the act. But why not just arrest him? Why go through all this?" Chen joined them, his CIA credentials now visible on a lanyard around his neck. "Because Harrington was just one part of a larger network. We needed to identify his contractors, his communications channels, his offshore accounts. And we needed to be sure he was the one who betrayed Ghost Eagle Team 7, Sarah added, her voice hardening. "We had suspicions, but not proof. Now we have both." Laura shook her head, trying to process everything. So the harassment, the hazing, the accidents, you endured all that as part of your cover. Sometimes the best hunters pretend to be prey. Sarah repeated her earlier cryptic statement, now with context that made its meaning clear. A medical technician approached to examine Laura's injuries. The shrapnel from the grenade had left a deep gash in her arm that was bleeding profusely. Sarah immediately knelt beside her, pulling a military-grade trauma kit from her pocket. Cheeto Pack Pro, Sarah explained as she applied the specialized hemostatic dressing to Laura's wound. Standard issue for SEAL Team 6 medics, stops bleeding in under 60 seconds. As she worked with practiced efficiency, Frank Reynolds approached from the direction of the command post carrying a rifle case. He nodded to General Montgomery, who returned the gesture with the respect reserved for those who've shared battlefield experiences. "You found our ghost," Montgomery said to Frank. "She wasn't hiding very hard, sir," Frank replied. "Not from those who knew what to look for." Sarah finished bandaging Laura's wound and stood to face Frank. "You knew from the beginning." "I trained your team before they deployed to Afghanistan," Frank confirmed. "Recognized your hands on that M4 the first day. Figured you had a damn good reason for playing dead and decided to let it play out." He gestured to the rifle case. "Brought this. Thought you might need it." Inside was an M40A5 sniper rifle meticulously maintained. "Had to make sure Harrington's men didn't get away," Frank explained. "Old habits." Montgomery turned to Chen. "Status report, Lieutenant." "We've captured 6 contractors alive, sir. 2 KIA. Initial IDs suggest they're former military working through a private security firm with known connections to overseas interests." Chen consulted his TACpad. "We've also secured Harrington's communications equipment, including a military-grade satellite phone with quantum encryption, used for untraceable contact with the offshore accounts and black market arms dealers." "The perfect setup for selling classified operation details," Montgomery observed grimly. Sarah's attention was drawn to one of the captured contractors being led toward the transport vehicles. Something about his walk, the set of his shoulders. "Wait," she called out, moving closer. The man kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. Sarah reached out and forcibly turned his face toward her. Recognition hit like a physical blow. "Jenkins, Staff Sergeant David Jenkins." The man's eyes finally met hers, defiance mixed with fear. "Captain Morgan, back from the dead. You were stationed at FOB Thunder during Black Storm." Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. "You had access to our route information." Jenkins said nothing, but his expression was answer enough. "How many more?" Sarah demanded. "How deep does this go?" "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," Jenkins finally replied. "Harrington's just a middle manager. The real power is elsewhere." Before Sarah could press further, Montgomery intervened. "We'll get answers, Captain. All of them. But first you need medical attention." He nodded to the waiting helicopter. "That's an order." As the medical team guided Sarah toward the helicopter, Laura caught up with her. "What happens now?" Sarah looked back at Harrington being loaded into a separate transport under heavy guard. "Justice for 15 good operators who never came home." And for you, Sarah had no answer. For 3 years, she'd been officially dead, living under assumed identities, focused solely on exposing Harrington's betrayal. With that mission now complete, the future was unexpectedly blank. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought past today." As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah looked down at Camp Jefferson sprawling below. 3 weeks ago, she'd arrived here as prey. Now she was leaving as something else. Not quite the ghost she'd been, not quite the soldier she was before. Something new, forged in betrayal but tempered by justice. The next weeks passed in a blur of debriefings, medical treatments, and revelations. The network Harrington had built was more extensive than anyone had imagined. Each arrested conspirator led to 2 more. A cancer that had metastasized throughout multiple commands. The damage assessment was staggering. Hundreds of operations potentially compromised. Dozens of deaths that might have been prevented. Through it all, Sarah testified with the same calm precision she'd brought to her undercover role. She sat in secure facilities recounting 3 years of living death, the 16 hours among her murdered teammates, the careful construction of her cover identity. She never raised her voice, never showed emotion beyond professional detachment, but those who listened closely could hear the weight she carried in every carefully chosen word. The media explosion was inevitable. "Dead hero exposes traitor commander," screamed headlines across the country. Sarah's photo, both as the broken recruit and in full Delta Force kit, became iconic. The eagle tattoo was analyzed, mythologized, turned into a symbol of military resilience. She refused all interview requests, letting the facts speak for themselves. A month after the forest ambush, Sarah stood in Arlington National Cemetery. 15 headstones stretched before her, names she'd carried for 3 years. She wore her dress uniform for the first time since her death. Every ribbon and qualification badge restored. The Navy Cross Montgomery had recommended would be presented next week, but that ceremony felt hollow compared to this moment. Got him, got him, she said quietly to the stones. Took longer than I hoped, cost more than I wanted. But Victor Harrington will never send another soldier to die for money. She placed a small eagle pin on each grave, tokens she'd had made specially. You can rest now, all accounts paid. Talking to the dead captain. Sarah didn't turn at Chen's approach. They'd maintained their cover distance and her distance throughout the operation, but she'd always known he was more than just a conveniently placed intelligence officer. Someone should, she replied simply. They deserved to know their sacrifice meant something. It did. Chen moved to stand beside her, studying the graves. Harrington gave up everything in interrogation. Names, dates, account numbers. We're rolling up terror cells from Afghanistan to Michigan. Your teammates didn't die for nothing. They shouldn't have died at all. No, Chen agreed. They shouldn't have. He paused, then pulled out a sealed envelope. There's something else, something that wasn't in any report. Sarah finally looked at him. What kind of something? Chen handed her the envelope. This was in Harrington's personal effects, hidden in a false bottom of his desk drawer. It's addressed to Ghost Eagle 7. The envelope was old, worn at the edges, like it had been handled often. Sarah's name, her real name, was written on it in handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it carefully, extracting a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo showed Harrington with another man, both in civilian clothes, standing in what looked like a safe house. The second man's face was partially obscured, but something about his posture, the way he held himself, was familiar. Too familiar. The letter was brief. 7. If you're reading this, then Harrington failed, and you survived again. You always were too stubborn to die properly. The game isn't over. The eagle isn't the only bird that can rise from ashes. When you're ready to know the whole truth, you'll find me where it all began. 6. Sarah's hand tightened on the paper. 6. Ghost Eagle 6. Major David Reynolds, Chen has supplied. Your team leader, supposedly killed in the first wave of the ambush. His body was so damaged it required DNA confirmation, Sarah said, staring at the photo, which Harrington arranged. DNA can be faked if you have inside help, Chen pointed out, and Harrington had help everywhere. Sarah studied the photo again, noting details. A calendar on the wall showing a date 2 months after Reynolds' supposed death. A newspaper with a readable headline from even later. He's alive, she whispered. Ghost Eagle 6 is alive, and he's been running things from the shadows while Harrington took the heat. Where it all began, Chen read from the letter. What does that mean? Sarah was already moving, heading back toward the cemetery gates with purpose. FOB Thunder, Kandahar Province, where we staged for Black Storm. If 6 is sending messages, that's where he'd want to meet. Sarah, wait. Chen caught up with her. This could be a trap. Another attempt to finish what Harrington started. Of course it's a trap. Sarah stopped at her car. But it's also answers. Reynolds was our intelligence specialist, our mission planner. If he turned, she shook her head, he'd know things Harrington never could. Operating procedures, contact protocols, emergency codes that are still active. All the more reason not to go alone. Sarah looked back at the cemetery, at the 15 graves standing silent in neat rows, then at Chen, who'd risked his career to help her get justice. This isn't your fight. Wasn't my fight before either, Chen replied. Didn't stop me from volunteering. His expression was resolute. You've been alone for 3 years. Maybe it's time to remember what having backup feels like. The offer hung between them, complicated by everything unspoken. Sarah had learned to operate alone, to trust no one, to see betrayal in every shadow. But she was tired of being a ghost, tired of carrying the weight alone. Kandahar's a long way from Jefferson, she said finally, and I have reports to file. Montgomery expects my full debrief by Monday. Write it on the plane, Chen smiled slightly. I hear Afghanistan is lovely this time of year, perfect for reunions with dead teammates who might be international terrorists. Despite everything, Sarah found herself almost smiling back. You intelligence types always making things complicated, says the woman who played dead for 3 years to catch a traitor. And then they stood there in the parking lot of Arlington, two soldiers who had seen too much preparing for a war that apparently wasn't over. Somewhere out there, Ghost Eagle 6 was waiting. The eagle had risen, but apparently she wasn't the only one with resurrection in her story. The Black Hawk helicopter cut through the morning sky above Bagram Air Base, its rotors slicing the thin Afghan air with mechanical precision. Sarah Morgan sat near the open door, the familiar landscape of Afghanistan stretching beneath her like a faded photograph. Harsh browns and tans, occasional splashes of green, marking rare oases in the unforgiving terrain. 3 years ago, she'd left this country on a medical evacuation flight, officially dead to the world. Now she was back hunting a ghost of her own. First time back, Chen asked from the seat opposite her, his voice barely audible over the rotor noise. Sarah shook her head. Came back twice during the investigation. Different name, different face. She gestured to her now healed shoulder. Different body. Different purpose now, Chen observed. Sarah checked her weapon for the third time, the same M40A5 sniper rifle Frank Reynolds had provided. The familiar weight of it in her hands brought back muscle memories from countless operations. The scope had been calibrated to her exact specifications, the trigger pull adjusted to the precise pressure she preferred. ETA 10 minutes, the pilot announced through their headsets. Weather conditions, optimal visibility, excellent. FOB Thunder had been officially decommissioned 2 years ago, part of the drawdown of American forces from Afghanistan. What remained was a ghost of military infrastructure, abandoned buildings, empty guard towers, and a perimeter that nature was slowly reclaiming. The perfect meeting place for dead men. General Montgomery had authorized the mission with reluctance. "This is outside standard protocol, Captain Morgan," he'd said during their final briefing. "But so is everything about this situation. If Reynolds is really alive, sir, he poses a significant threat to ongoing operations. He knows too much. And if he's not, if this is just bait to lure you out, then we spring the trap and see who's holding the other end." The helicopter banked sharply, circling the abandoned base from 2,000 feet. Through her binoculars, Sarah scanned the compound below. No movement, no heat signatures visible. Just dust and memories. "Drop zone looks clear," she reported. "No visible hostiles." "Could be subsurface," Chen cautioned. "Underground bunkers, interior positions." "That's why we're not landing." Sarah secured her tactical gear one final time. Infill plan remains unchanged. 5 minutes later, Sarah and Chen were rappelling from the hovering helicopter, touching down outside the base perimeter as the Black Hawk pulled away. They would have 12 hours before extraction. 12 hours to find a dead man or confirm he was truly gone. "Remember," Chen said as they approached the outer fence, "Reynolds was Delta Force intelligence. If he's been planning this for 3 years, he'll have contingencies for every approach," Sarah finished. "That's why we're not approaching according to any Special Forces protocol. We do this like a standard recon. No fancy tactics he would recognize." They breached the perimeter at the weakest point, a section of fence damaged by years of neglect and harsh weather. The fine Afghan dust rose in small clouds around their boots as they moved with practiced stealth toward the main compound. FOB Thunder had been home to over 300 personnel at its peak. Now the administration buildings, barracks, and mess hall stood abandoned, windows, broken doors hanging open. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through empty corridors. "Command center first," Sarah directed. "If Reynolds left any message, that's where it would be." The command center had once been the nerve center of operations across 3 provinces. Now it was a shell stripped of anything valuable. Dust-covered desks, empty cable channels, where classified equipment had once transmitted vital intelligence. The ghosts of war decisions lingered in the stale air. Chen moved to secure the room while Sarah examined the commander's office. Nothing seemed disturbed from standard decommissioning protocols until she reached the tactical planning table. There, pressed into the dust with deliberate precision, was a single set of fingerprints. "He's been here," she said quietly. "Recently." Chen joined her, examining the prints. "Could be anyone." "Index finger of the right hand is missing the upper segment," Sarah pointed out. Reynolds lost it during an operation in Mosul 24, and a thorough search of the command center revealed nothing else, but Sarah wasn't discouraged. This was simply confirmation, the first breadcrumb in what would undoubtedly be a carefully laid trail. We need to check the armory next, she decided. It was Reynolds' secondary position during Black Storm. The armory was located on the opposite side of the base, requiring them to cross the exposed parade ground. They moved from shadow to shadow, maintaining cover despite the apparent desertion of the base. As they approached the reinforced building, Chen suddenly raised his fist, the universal signal to halt. "Tripwire," he whispered, pointing to a nearly invisible filament stretched across the armory entrance. Military grade, not old equipment left behind. Sarah knelt to examine it. Pressure sensitive, not enough explosive to kill, just to alert. Someone's expecting company. They carefully bypassed the tripwire and entered the armory. Unlike the command center, this building showed signs of recent use. Weapons racks had been rearranged, ammunition crates stacked in a deliberate pattern. On the central table lay a single challenge coin, identical to the one Sarah had found in her boot at Camp Jefferson. "It's a message," Sarah said, picking up the coin. Reynolds was always big on symbolism. "What's it mean?" "The racks are arranged by operation date," Sarah explained, moving between them. "Black Storm, Operation Silver Mountain. He's giving us a history lesson. He's showing me he remembers everything." Sarah studied the ammunition crates. "These are stacked by casualty count, highest on top." Chen circled to display professional curiosity, overriding caution. "It's a memorial or a confession?" "Both," Sarah said quietly. "The coin is placed exactly where he stood during our final briefing before Black Storm." She closed her eyes, briefly remembering. "He told us it would be a routine convoy interdiction. Intelligence showed minimal opposition, standard security protocols would be sufficient. He sent you in blind. Worse than blind, he sent us in prepared for the wrong threat entirely." Sarah's voice hardened. 15 operators, Chen, some of the best soldiers America ever produced, all dead because Reynolds sold us out. A soft electronic beep interrupted her, a sound so quiet it would have been missed by anyone not trained to detect the specific frequency. Sarah immediately located the source, a satellite phone, carefully concealed inside one of the ammunition crates. The screen displayed a single text message. "Hello 7, memory lane treating you well. Look beneath your feet for the next step." Sarah immediately dropped to examine the floor. Beneath the table was a section of flooring that didn't match the rest, newer concrete recently disturbed. "Pressure plate?" Chen asked, weapon ready. "No," Sarah replied, carefully prying up the section. Dead drop. Inside the hidden compartment was a waterproof case containing a flash drive and another handwritten note, 7, still as thorough as ever. "The drive contains what you need to understand. Come alone to the ridge where we watched the sunrise before Black Storm. You remember the place." 6. Sarah pocketed the note and handed the flash drive to Chen. "Can you access this?" Chen produced a specialized tablet from his pack. "Secure viewing only. No network connection." The flash drive contained only one file of the video. Chen set the tablet on the table and they both watched as the recording began to play. Major David Reynolds, Ghost Eagle 6, stared back at them from the screen. He looked older than Sarah remembered, with a jagged scar running down the left side of his face, but very much alive. The background showed a nondescript room that could have been anywhere in the world. "Hello, Sarah," Reynolds began. "If you're watching this, you have already eliminated Harrington. Congratulations. He was always the weak link." His voice was exactly as she remembered it, calm, measured, with the quiet authority that had made him such an effective leader. "I'm sure you have questions. Why am I alive? Why did I betray the team? What was worth 15 American lives?" Reynolds leaned closer to the camera. "The answer is simple. Nothing was worth those lives, because I never betrayed them." Sarah's grip tightened on her weapon. "Harrington sold us out," Reynolds continued, "but he was working for someone else. Someone inside the Pentagon. Someone with access to the highest levels of operational planning. I discovered the leak 3 days before Black Storm, but I didn't know who to trust. So I created a fail-safe false intelligence that only I knew was wrong. If the ambush happened exactly where I feared it would, I'd know the leak came from inside our direct chain of command." "And that's why he's separated from the main convoy," Sarah whispered. "He wasn't avoiding the ambush. He was testing his theory. I never expected them to hit us with that level of force. Reynolds' continued regret etching his features. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I tried to circle back to help, but a secondary IED caught my vehicle. When I regained consciousness, I heard Harrington on the radio confirming all team members KIA. Reynolds paused, collecting himself. I knew then that he was involved, but I still didn't know how high it went. So I did the only thing I could. I stayed dead, used my intelligence background to create a new identity, and started tracking the money. 3 years, Sarah. 3 years of following weapons shipments, monitoring financial transfers, infiltrating contractor networks, all leading back to the same source. The video image changed, showing documents, bank statements, classified operational plans. Then a photograph appeared, a distinguished man in a general's uniform, shaking hands with known arms dealers in Dubai. General William Montgomery, Reynolds said as Sarah inhaled sharply, the man who authorized Black Storm, the man who selected our team specifically, the man who made sure we'd be carrying the intelligence package that the Haqqani network paid $15 million to obtain. That's impossible, Chen said immediately. Montgomery's been leading this investigation from the beginning. The perfect cover, Sarah replied, her mind racing. He positions himself as the champion of justice while eliminating everyone who might expose him. First Ghost Eagle team, then Harrington when he became a liability. And now you, Chen concluded grimly. There's more, Reynolds continued on screen. Montgomery isn't working alone. He's part of a network of senior military officials and defense contractors who've been selling operational intelligence for years. They call themselves the Council. Black Storm was just one operation among dozens. The flash drive contains everything I've gathered. Names, dates, bank accounts. Enough to bring down the entire network. Reynolds leaned forward again, his expression intense. I need to know if I can trust you, Sarah. Montgomery will have sent someone with you, standard protocol for a mission like this. If you come to the ridge alone, I'll know you believe me. If not, he shrugged, then this ends here. The video stopped. Chen and Sarah stared at the frozen image in silence. It could be an elaborate trap, Chen finally said. Reynolds could be working with Montgomery, using you to eliminate Harrington and then tying up loose ends. Or he could be telling the truth, Sarah countered. And Montgomery sent you to make sure neither of us leaves Afghanistan alive. The tension between them was instant and electric. Chen's hand drifted closer to his sidearm. Sarah's finger rested lightly outside the trigger guard of her rifle. 3 years of counterintelligence work, Chen said carefully. That's a lot of effort for a trap. Unless the stakes are worth it, Sarah's eyes never left Chen's. $15 million for Black Storm alone. How many other operations? How many other dead soldiers? Billions, potentially. You don't really think I'm working for Montgomery? I don't know what to think anymore. Sarah's voice was deadly calm. 3 weeks ago, I watched a man I trusted with my life try to kill me in cold blood. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. Chen slowly raised his hands, moving them away from his weapon. If I wanted you dead, I've had a dozen opportunities, including right now. Sarah considered this, then lowered her rifle slightly. So what's your play? We check the evidence, Chen decided. Before we meet Reynolds, before we contact Montgomery, we verify what's on that drive. Sarah nodded. It was the rational approach. The CIA safe house in Kabul. We can access secure systems there. And if Reynolds is telling the truth, if Montgomery really is behind all this, Sarah's expression hardened. Then he faces the same justice as Harrington, no matter how many stars he wears. As they prepared to exit the armory, Sarah paused at the table with the challenge coin. She picked it up, turning it over in her fingers, feeling the weight of it, the weight of memory, of responsibility, of vengeance, too long delayed. Reynolds was right about one thing, she said quietly. I am going to that ridge alone. Sarah, you said you wanted to verify the evidence. Do it. Take the flash drive to Kabul. If I'm not back in 24 hours, release everything to every intelligence agency and news outlet on the planet. That's not the plan, Chen objected. We're supposed to stay together. Whose plan, Chen? Montgomery's? Sarah checked her weapons one final time. If Reynolds is telling the truth, then Montgomery expected you to eliminate both of us once we found what we were looking for. If Reynolds is lying, then he's planning to eliminate me at the meeting point. Either way, the odds improve if we split up. Chen wanted to argue but recognized the tactical logic. 24 hours, he agreed reluctantly. Then I burn it all down, as Sarah nodded. That ridge is 4 hours hike from here. I need to move now to make it before sundown. As she prepared to leave, Chen caught her arm. Sarah, be careful. Reynolds was your commanding officer, someone you trusted. That makes him more dangerous, not less. I know. Sarah's eyes were cold with resolve. Trust is what got my team killed. It won't happen again. The ridge overlooked the valley where Operation Black Storm had unfolded 3 years earlier. From this vantage point, Sarah could see the exact stretch of road where the ambush had occurred. The twisted remains of military vehicles still littered the roadside grim monuments to a betrayal too costly to contemplate. She arrived as the sun was beginning its descent, bathing the Hindu Kush Mountains in blood-red light, the same light that had illuminated their final briefing before the mission. Reynolds had brought the team here ostensibly to survey the terrain, but really Sarah now realized to say goodbye. He'd known they wouldn't be coming back. She set up her position carefully, establishing multiple escape routes, placing defensive measures at strategic points. If this was a trap, she wouldn't go down easily. The weight was excruciating. Each sound, the whisper of wind through mountain scrub, the distant call of birds, set her nerves on edge. The M40A5 rested comfortably against her shoulder, its scope sweeping the approaches in a regular pattern. The sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains when she heard the subtle displacement of air that indicated movement behind her. She didn't turn, didn't react. Only the slight tightening of her finger near the trigger betrayed her awareness. You always did have the patience of a saint. Reynolds' voice was exactly as it had been in the video, calm, controlled, familiar. 22 hours in that sniper hide in Fallujah without moving a muscle. I've never seen anything like it. People change, Sarah replied, still not turning. Dead men especially. Fair enough. Reynolds moved into her peripheral vision, deliberately keeping his hands visible. He was thinner than she remembered, the scar on his face giving him a harsher appearance. But his eyes were the same, alert, intelligent, assessing. I see you came alone. Thank you for that. Don't thank me yet. Sarah finally turned to face him fully, the rifle still ready. Chen's in Kabul analyzing your evidence. If I don't check in regularly, he releases everything. If it's fake, he alerts Montgomery. Reynolds nodded, apparently satisfied with the precaution. It's not fake. Every document, every recording, every bank transfer, it's all authentic. Montgomery and his counsel have been selling American lives for profit for nearly a decade. Why? The question that had haunted Sarah for 3 years. Why betray everything? Money, for some of them, yes. Reynolds found a rock to sit on, maintaining a respectful distance. For others, it's ideology. They believe America's role in the world is changing, that traditional alliances are outdated. They're positioning themselves for what they see as the inevitable shift in global power. By selling out their own soldiers, Sarah's voice contained tightly controlled fury. By making connections with forces they believe will dominate the New World Order. Reynolds sighed heavily. Montgomery's the true believer. The others follow the money. Together, they've compromised operations across 3 continents. Sarah processed this, the tactical implications unfolding in her mind. The council, how many members? 8 that I've confirmed. 4 military, 4 civilian. All with significant influence in defense policy or contracting. And you've been tracking them for 3 years. Sarah's tone contained a note of accusation. While the rest of us thought you were dead, while families mourned. Reynolds met her gaze directly. I made choices I'll answer for someday, but they were necessary. If I'd surfaced too soon before I had enough evidence, Montgomery would have eliminated me and continued operations. More soldiers would have died. Like Harrington was eliminated when he became a liability. Exactly. Montgomery sent you after Harrington for the same reason he sent Chen with you to find Sam, clean up the loose ends. Sarah considered this. You said in your video that you discovered the leak before Black Storm. Why not abort the mission? I tried. Reynolds' voice carried genuine regret. I filed a request to delay based on incomplete intelligence. Montgomery personally overrode me, insisted the time-sensitive nature of the mission required immediate action. And you didn't warn us. I gave the team alternate routes, contingency plans. But without knowing exactly who was compromised, I couldn't risk explicitly warning anyone. Reynolds looked out over the valley. I thought I was being paranoid that my security measures would be enough. I was wrong. The pain in his voice seemed genuine, but Sarah had learned the hard way that sincerity could be faked. Convenient that you were separated from the main convoy when the ambush hit. Not convenience. Strategy. Reynolds pulled up his pant leg, revealing a prosthetic limb below the knee. I paid for that decision too. The secondary IED was meant to eliminate any survivors from the main ambush. I was lucky. Sarah hadn't noticed the slight unevenness in his gait earlier. The prosthetic was advanced military grade designed to minimize detection. So what's your plan now? She asked, slightly lowering her rifle. You've gathered the evidence. What's the endgame? Justice, Reynolds replied simply. But we need to be smart about it. The council has contingencies. If we move against them directly, evidence disappears, witnesses have accidents, and nothing changes. You have something specific in mind. Reynolds smiled slightly. I always did appreciate your ability to cut to the chase, Sarah. He reached slowly into his jacket, telegraphing every movement, and withdrew a small device. This is a quantum encrypted communications hub. It connects to secure servers containing copies of all the evidence. If Montgomery or any council member attempts to access it without proper authorization, everything automatically releases to multiple intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and media outlets worldwide. A dead man's switch. Exactly. We confront Montgomery directly with the evidence and the switch as leverage. Sarah considered the plan. It was tactically sound, but something still bothered her. Why didn't you contact me sooner once you knew I was alive and investigating Harrington? Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Because I wasn't sure whose side you were on. Montgomery could have used your survival as leverage. I needed to see how the Harrington operation played out. You were testing me. Sarah felt a flash of anger, while I was getting shot at by Harrington's mercenaries. I was being cautious, Reynolds corrected. When you publicly exposed Harrington, instead of eliminating him quietly, I knew you were still the Sarah Morgan I remembered. Still committed to justice, not vengeance. The distinction felt meaningless to Sarah after 3 years of living death, but she understood the tactical reasoning. Trust was a luxury neither of them could afford. So we confront Montgomery, she said, thinking through the angles. With what leverage? He'll have security protocols, contingency plans of his own. We have 2 advantages, Reynolds explained. First, he thinks I'm still in Afghanistan. He doesn't expect us to bring the fight to him directly. Second, he has a weakness, his public image. The decorated general, the tireless advocate for fallen soldiers. We confront him where he can't risk exposure. The Navy Cross ceremony, Sarah realized. He's presenting it to me next week at the Pentagon. Very public, very controlled. Perfect conditions for our purpose. Reynolds nodded approvingly. We present the evidence, explain the consequences of the dead man's switch, and offer terms. What terms? People like Montgomery don't just surrender. Resignation, full confession, testimony against the other council members. In exchange for consideration during sentencing. Sarah laughed bitterly. You really think he'll agree to that? I think he'll calculate the odds and make the rational choice. Reynolds stood wincing slightly as he adjusted his prosthetic leg. Montgomery's a pragmatist at heart. Self-preservation will win out over ideology. And if it doesn't, Reynolds' expression hardened, then we activate the switch and watch his world burn. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Confront Montgomery at his moment of greatest visibility, when his security would be focused outward rather than on the trusted soldier receiving a decoration. Use the evidence and the threat of global exposure to force compliance. Clean, controlled, and proportional. Sarah wanted to believe it could work, but something still nagged at her. You've been planning this for 3 years, she observed. Gathering evidence, tracking council members, setting up secure servers, all while officially dead. Yes, that takes resources, significant resources. Who funded your operation? Reynolds' slight hesitation told Sarah everything. I had contacts, assets from previous operations. Not enough for what you've described, Sarah pressed. Someone backed you. Who? Reynolds sighed. Some questions are better answered later, Sarah. I'm not walking into another trap, Reynolds. Not again. Either complete transparency or I walk away now. They stared at each other, 2 operators calculating risk and advantage in the fading light of an Afghan sunset. Finally, Reynolds nodded. I have a backer, someone with resources and a vested interest in exposing the council. Poetic, a former council member who grew a conscience, defense contractor named Alan Walsh. His company lost billions when he refused to participate in their schemes. He's been funding my operation from the shadows. Sarah processed this new information. Why didn't you include him in the evidence package? His involvement is our insurance policy. If something goes wrong, if Montgomery somehow neutralizes our primary leverage, Walsh is positioned to release secondary evidence packages. It made tactical sense, but the layers of secrecy and contingency planning only reinforced how deep this conspiracy ran, how dangerous their opponents truly were. I need to verify this, Sarah said finally, all of it, before I agree to anything. I expected nothing less. Reynolds handed her a secure satellite phone. Call Chen. Have him check the files on Walsh. Everything's there. Sarah made the call, stepping away to speak privately while keeping Reynolds in her line of sight. Chen answered immediately. Sarah, are you okay? I'm fine. Reynolds and I are discussing terms. We need to talk about the evidence, Chen said urgently. It's legitimate, all of it. Montgomery, the council, the operations they compromised, it's worse than we imagined. Tell me about Alan Walsh. There was a brief pause. Former defense contractor, specialized in advanced communication systems, resigned abruptly 3 years ago, liquidated most of his holdings. Officially, he's retired to a private island in the Pacific. And unofficially, he's been funding a shadow operation targeting high-level military corruption. The transfer records are all here, shell companies' cutouts, but the money trail leads back to him. Sarah looked back at Reynolds, who waited patiently, his posture relaxed but alert. What's your assessment? Can we trust this evidence is solid? Chen replied after a moment. Whether we can trust Reynolds or Walsh is a separate question, but Montgomery's guilt is beyond doubt. That was enough for now. Sarah ended the call and rejoined Reynolds. Chen confirms your story, she said. So what's the next step? We return to Washington, Reynolds replied. Prepare for the ceremony. Walsh will arrange secure transportation. And after we confront Montgomery. What then? Reynolds studied her for a long moment. That depends on you, Sarah. For 3 years, I've had one purpose, exposing the council and bringing them to justice. When that's done, he shrugged. I'm still officially dead. I could disappear, again, start over somewhere new. Or I could come back, face the consequences of my deception, try to rebuild some kind of life. His gaze was steady. What about you? What happens to Ghost Eagle 7 after this mission is complete? It was a question Sarah hadn't allowed herself to consider. For 3 years, her existence had been defined by a single purpose, finding the truth behind the betrayal at Black Storm. Without that driving force, who was she? I don't know, she admitted. I haven't thought past bringing Montgomery down. Reynolds nodded, understanding. One step at a time, then. First, we end this. As they prepared to depart the ridge, Sarah looked out over the valley one last time. Somewhere down there, the remains of her teammates had been recovered 3 years ago. Bodies shipped home with honors, while the architect of their deaths presided over memorial services and offered condolences to grieving families. We'll make it right, Reynolds said quietly, following her gaze. No, Sarah replied. We can't make it right. 15 good operators are still dead. Nothing changes that. She shouldered her rifle with grim determination. But we can make sure they didn't die for nothing. The Pentagon ceremonial hall was filled to capacity. Rows of dress uniforms, the glint of medals and insignia, the solemn atmosphere of military tradition. At the front, a podium stood ready, flanked by the flags of each service branch. Behind it, a row of distinguished officers waited to present honors to selected service members. In the center sat General William Montgomery, his chest covered with the decorations earned over a 40-year military career. His silver hair and weathered face projected wisdom and authority, the perfect image of American military leadership. Sarah sat in the front row, her dress uniform immaculate, the empty space on her chest awaiting the Navy Cross that Montgomery would soon pin there. Her expression was professionally neutral, betraying nothing of the storm that raged inside her. Reynolds was positioned at the rear of the hall, disguised as a junior staff officer, his prosthetic leg concealed by his uniform trousers. No one looked twice at yet another military aide managing the ceremony logistics. Chen had taken a more visible role, his CIA credentials giving him access as part of the security detail. He stood near the side entrance, maintaining line of sight with both Sarah and Reynolds. The ceremony began with the standard protocols invocation national anthem remarks from the Secretary of Defense. Sarah barely heard any of it, her focus entirely on Montgomery and the confrontation to come. Finally, her name was called. Captain Sarah Morgan, United States Army Special Forces. She rose and approached the podium with measured steps. Montgomery stepped forward, the Navy Cross held reverently in his hands. His smile seemed genuine, his eyes showing no trace of the monster Reynolds had described. Captain Morgan, he began following the ceremonial script. For extraordinary heroism while engaged in military operations involving conflict with hostile forces. Your actions during and after Operation Black Storm exemplify the highest traditions of military service. The irony was almost unbearable. The man responsible for the deaths of her teammates was publicly honoring her for surviving his betrayal. Montgomery continued with the citation describing how Sarah had survived the ambush, gathered critical intelligence, and ultimately exposed Harrington's treason. Each word was a carefully crafted lie designed to bury the truth beneath layers of patriotic sentiment. As he finished the citation and prepared to pin the medal, Sarah spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. Before you place that medal, General, I'll have a question. She maintained perfect military bearing, but her eyes locked onto his with unmistakable intensity. Where were you on the night of April 17, 20? Montgomery's expression flickered momentarily before returning to professional composure. Captain, April 17, 2019, the night before Operation Black Storm. You were in Dubai meeting with representatives of the Haqqani network to arrange the ambush that killed 15 American soldiers. A murmur ran through the assembled officers. Montgomery's face hardened. Captain Morgan, this is neither the time nor place. It's exactly the time and place, Sarah countered, her voice still controlled but louder now, ensuring everyone could hear. 3 years ago, you sold out Ghost Eagle team for $15 million. 2 weeks ago, you tried to eliminate me at Camp Jefferson when I got too close to the truth. And yesterday, you dispatched a kill team to Afghanistan to eliminate Major Reynolds before he could expose your entire operation. The murmuring grew louder. Security personnel looked to their earpieces for instructions, confused by the unfolding situation. Montgomery's mask of benevolence disappeared entirely. Captain Morgan is suffering from post-traumatic stress, he announced to the crowd. Her accusations are delusional. Security, please. Escort her. The Dubai meeting was recorded. Reynolds' voice cut through the hall as he stepped forward, removing his disguise. As were your communications with the Haqqani network, your offshore account transfers, and your orders to eliminate Ghost Eagle team members who survived the initial ambush. A gasp went through the audience as Reynolds was recognized. The officially dead commander of Ghost Eagle team, now standing very much alive in the Pentagon ceremonial hall. Major Reynolds, Montgomery's voice turned cold. Another ghost come back to haunt me. How convenient that the two of you have found each other. He gestured to his security detail. Arrest them both, now. But the security personnel hesitated, uncertain who to obey in this unprecedented situation. Before you make that decision, Chen intervened, stepping forward with his CIA credentials displayed. You should know that everything Captain Morgan and Major Reynolds have alleged is supported by extensive evidence. Evidence that will be released to every major news outlet and intelligence agency worldwide if anything happens to them. Montgomery's eyes darted between the three of them, calculating rapidly. This is absurd. You have no proof. We have bank records showing $15 million transferred to your Cayman accounts the day after Black Storm, Reynolds stated calmly. We have recorded conversations between you and Harrington discussing the elimination of witnesses. We have your meeting schedule showing you in Dubai when you were officially at the Pentagon. And we have Alan Walsh, Sarah added, delivering the final blow, your former council colleague who documented everything before he got out. At the mention of Walsh, genuine fear flickered across Montgomery's face for the first time. He looked around the room, seeing the uncertainty in the faces of those who had revered him moments earlier. This is a coordinated attack on a decorated officer, he tried, appealing to military solidarity. These accusations are not only false, but dangerous to national security. Which is why we're prepared to handle this quietly. Reynolds offered, his voice reasonable. Resign your commission today. Provide written testimony against the other council members. Cooperate fully with the subsequent investigation. In exchange, certain considerations during sentencing might be arranged. Montgomery's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. You expect me to fall on my sword based on manufactured evidence and the word of two officers who were officially dead until recently? I think not. Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping so only Montgomery could hear. We're giving you a chance to retain some dignity, more than you gave the 15 operators you sent to their deaths. Take the offer or we release everything. Every operation you compromised. Every dollar you took. Every American soldier who died because of your betrayal. You'd never get out of this building alive? Montgomery threatened, his hand moving subtly toward his sidearm. We don't need to, Reynolds replied, holding up the quantum encryption device. This transmitter is already armed. If my heartbeat stops, or if I don't enter a code every 6 hours, everything releases automatically. The hall had grown deathly quiet, the assembled officers and officials watching the confrontation with stunned fascination. No one moved to intervene, the allegations too serious, the participants too credible to dismiss outright. Montgomery assessed his options with the tactical precision that had once made him an effective field commander. His gaze settled on Sarah, a new calculation forming behind his eyes. Captain Morgan, he said, his voice taking on a conciliatory tone, you've been manipulated. Reynolds is not who you think he is. Save it, Sarah replied coldly. He's played you masterfully, Montgomery continued. Did he tell you he was tracking me for 3 years, that he was gathering evidence against the council? We've seen the evidence, Chen interjected. It's authenticated. Of course it is, Montgomery agreed, because Reynolds created it. The real reason he separated from the main convoy during Black Storm wasn't to test a theory about intelligence leaks. It was to ensure his own survival while selling out his team. Sarah's expression didn't change, but Reynolds tensed slightly. Ask yourself who benefits most from this scenario, Montgomery pressed. Reynolds was presumed dead. No one was looking for him. He could have come forward at any time with this alleged evidence. Why wait 3 years? Why surface only after you had independently identified Harrington? Because he needed to be sure the evidence was complete. Sarah answered, but there was the faintest note of uncertainty in her voice. Montgomery sensed the opening and pushed harder. Or because he needed Harrington eliminated first, the one person who could identify him as a co-conspirator. That's enough, Reynolds snapped. Your desperation is showing, General. Alan Walsh isn't funding Reynolds out of moral conviction, Montgomery continued relentlessly. He's protecting his investment, the original architect of the council, before I pushed him out for being too greedy. Sarah looked at Reynolds, whose face had become a mask of controlled fury. He's lying, Sarah. This is classic misdirection. Am I? Montgomery's smile was predatory now. Ask him about Operation Cerberus, the classified mission 3 months before Black Storm. Ask him where the intelligence came from that led to that ambush. A flicker of genuine concern crossed Reynolds' face, so brief most would have missed it, but Sarah had spent years reading micro-expressions during interrogations. Captain Morgan, a new voice called from the entrance to the hall. Frank Reynolds strode forward, his weathered frame still carrying the unmistakable bearing of a lifetime soldier. I believe this belongs in the conversation. He held up a small, weatherproof case, identical to the one they'd found at Phobe Thunder. Inside was another flash drive. Where did you get that? Reynolds demanded, his voice sharp with alarm. From the secure safe in the Camp Jefferson Armory, Frank explained. The one only Ghost Eagle commanders could access. I found it the day after you left for Afghanistan. What's on it? Sarah asked, her tactical mind now reassessing everything. The real evidence, Frank said grimly. Not the sanitized version Major Reynolds has been showing you. Chen immediately moved to secure the new flash drive, his CIA authority unchallenged in the confusion. This is another deception, Reynolds insisted, but his confident demeanor had cracked. Montgomery is manipulating all of you. Then you won't mind if we review the new evidence, Sarah replied, her voice cold with growing suspicion, before making any final decisions. Reynolds looked around the room, calculating odds, evaluating escape routes, the familiar behavior of an operator preparing for extraction. Sarah, we don't have time for this. The evidence against Montgomery is solid. We need to act now. No, Sarah's hand moved imperceptibly closer to her concealed sidearm. We need the truth. All of it. The tension in the hall was thick enough to cut. Dozens of high-ranking officers and officials watched in stunned silence as the drama unfolded. No one quite sure who was the villain, who was the hero. Captain Morgan is right, Montgomery said, seizing the moment. Let's examine all the evidence before making accusations. I have nothing to hide. The confidence in his voice gave Sarah pause. Either Montgomery was an exceptional actor, or he genuinely believed the new evidence would exonerate him. Chen, she ordered, review the drive. Now. As Chen connected the drive to a secure tablet, Reynolds made his move. With surprising speed for a man with a prosthetic leg, he lunged toward the nearest exit. Two security officers moved to intercept him, but Reynolds had the trained reflexes of a Delta operator. He disabled both with precise strikes before they could react. Stop him! Montgomery shouted, but Reynolds was already through the door, the quantum encryption device still clutched in his hand. Sarah was after him instantly, her own combat training taking over. She pursued Reynolds through the Pentagon's labyrinthine corridors, tracking his movement by the reactions of startled personnel he passed. She caught up to him at a service entrance, tackling him just as he was about to escape into the parking area. They went down hard years of shared combat training, evident in the way each sought leverage against the other. It's not what you think, Sarah, Reynolds grunted as they struggled. Montgomery's playing you. Then why run? Sarah countered, managing to pin his arm in a joint lock. If you're innocent, the evidence will show it. Because the evidence is incomplete, Walsh removed key elements that would have exposed his own involvement. Sarah increased pressure on the joint lock, bringing Reynolds to the edge of pain. The truth, David, now. Who really betrayed Ghost Eagle team? Their eyes locked commander and subordinate friends, and now potential enemies. Something in Reynolds seemed to break. We all did, he whispered. The council approached me 6 months before Black Storm. They said it was about managing unnecessary conflicts, ensuring America's strategic interests without endless wars. They offered money influence a place in the new order they were creating. You sold us out, Sarah's voice was deadly quiet. Not at first, Reynolds insisted. I played along gathering intelligence on their operations, but then I learned how deep it went, senators, cabinet members, generals. I realized I couldn't fight it from the outside. So you joined them. I compromised, Reynolds admitted the word heavy with shame. Minor intelligence at first, nothing that would cost lives, just enough to maintain my cover while I worked out a larger plan. Black Storm wasn't minor intelligence, Sarah hissed, tightening her hold. 15 operators died. That wasn't supposed to happen. Reynolds' composure cracked entirely. The Haqqani network was supposed to capture the convoy, take the intelligence package, release the team later as part of a prisoner exchange. Montgomery changed the parameters at the last minute, ordered the elimination of all witnesses. And you let it happen. I tried to warn the team. The alternate routes, the extra precautions, all attempts to sabotage the ambush without exposing myself. Sarah remembered the unusual briefing before the mission. Reynolds insisting on backup communications, alternative extraction points, ammunition beyond standard loadouts. Details that had seemed like cautious preparation at the time. When I realized what was happening, Reynolds continued, I tried to circle back to help. The IED was meant for me specifically. Montgomery had already decided I was a liability. The pieces were falling into place. Not a simple betrayal, but a complex web of compromises, calculations, and ultimately catastrophic misjudgment. These past 3 years, Sarah said, still maintaining the joint lock, the evidence gathering tracking the council. Was any of that real? All of it, Reynolds insisted. After I survived, I knew I had to make it right. Walsh approached me with resources, connections. He had his own reasons for wanting the council exposed. Because they pushed him out. Yes, our motivations were different, but our goal was the same. The evidence against Montgomery is real, Sarah. Whatever Frank found doesn't change that. Sarah studied him carefully, weighing truth against deception. The quantum device. What does it really do? Reynolds hesitated. It's not just a dead man's switch. It's also a targeted data wiper. When activated, it erases specific evidence linking Walsh and me to the original conspiracy while releasing everything else. Convenient. Necessary, Reynolds countered. The council needs to be exposed, but Walsh insisted on protection for himself. And he paused. I wanted a chance to explain to you first, before you saw everything. Sarah's military training demanded she bring Reynolds and face justice alongside Montgomery and the others. But 16 years in special forces had also taught her that battlefield realities rarely aligned with textbook morality. Captain Morgan, Chen's voice came from behind her. He had followed their path through the Pentagon, the secure tablet in his hand. I've reviewed the new evidence. And Sarah maintained her hold on Reynolds, unwilling to release him until she knew everything. It's complicated, Chen admitted. Reynolds did initially cooperate with the council, but the evidence shows he was attempting to gather intelligence from inside. His communications with outside agencies coded warnings to potential targets. What about Black Storm specifically? The original operation parameters support his story. The ambush was designed for capture, not elimination. Montgomery altered the orders less than 24 hours before execution. Reynolds wouldn't have known until it was too late. Sarah processed this information, the tactical part of her mind separating emotion from operational reality. And Walsh, definitely involved from the beginning, one of the founders of the council before Montgomery pushed him out. His current campaign against them appears motivated by revenge, not conscience. Reynolds met Sarah's gaze steadily. I've made mistakes, Sarah. Compromises I'll regret until the day I die. But exposing the council now is the right thing to do, whatever happens to me afterward. The moment stretched between them, heavy with shared history and broken trust. Finally, Sarah released the joint lock and stood. The quantum device, she demanded, holding out her hand. Now. Reynolds hesitated, then surrendered it. What are you going to do? Sarah examined the device carefully. The right thing, which isn't always the perfect thing. She looked at Chen. What's happening back in the hall? Montgomery is attempting damage control, claiming everything as a coordinated attack on military leadership. Frank is standing his ground, but without you two and the evidence, it's devolving into confusion. Then let's end the confusion, Sarah decided. She pulled Reynolds to his feet. Both of you are coming with me. We're going to finish what we started. They returned to the ceremonial hall where the situation had deteriorated into barely controlled chaos. Montgomery was at the podium addressing the assembled officers with practiced authority. These reckless accusations undermine the very foundation of military order, he was saying. Without proper chain of command, without trust in leadership. Without accountability, there is no leadership. Sarah interrupted, striding back into the hall with Reynolds and Chen flanking her. Only corruption wearing stars and medals. The room fell silent as she approached the podium, the quantum device visible in her hand. The evidence against General Montgomery and the council is conclusive, she announced. Bank records recorded conversations, operational details sold to enemy forces resulting in American casualties. Montgomery attempted to interject, but Sarah continued, her voice carrying the authority earned through 16 years of exemplary service. Major Reynolds' role in these events is complex. Initially compromised, he attempted to mitigate damage while gathering evidence against the larger conspiracy. His actions were imperfect, his judgment flawed. But his efforts these past 3 years have been directed toward exposing the truth. She turned to face the assembled officers directly. This is not how any of us wanted to serve our country. This is not the military we pledged to defend. But today we have a choice. We can bury this evidence to protect reputations and avoid scandal. Or we can demonstrate that American military justice applies equally to everyone regardless of rank or position. The silence that followed was profound. Decades of military tradition and hierarchy collided with the fundamental principles of honor and accountability that underpin the armed forces. Montgomery broke the silence, his voice now stripped of pretense. If you pursue this, Captain Morgan, you destroy more than a few careers. You undermine public confidence in military leadership at a time when America faces unprecedented threats. No, sir, Sarah countered. You did that when you sold out American soldiers for profit. We're just bringing it to light. She activated the quantum device, but not as Reynolds had intended. Instead of the selective data wipe that would have protected him and Walsh, she initiated a complete release of all evidence, unfiltered, unedited. The evidence is now being transmitted to the Department of Justice congressional oversight committees and key media outlets, she announced. The full truth, No redactions, no protections. Everyone involved will answer for their actions, including Major Reynolds and Alan Walsh. Reynolds closed his eyes briefly, accepting the consequences of her decision. Montgomery's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "You've just ended your career, Captain." "No, sir," Sarah replied calmly. "I've honored it." Military police entered the hall, their orders now clear in the face of the overwhelming evidence being disseminated worldwide. As they approached Montgomery, the general's hand moved toward his sidearm. "Don't," Sarah warned. "There's been enough bloodshed already." For a moment it seemed Montgomery might choose a final violent stand. Then his military discipline reasserted itself. He straightened, squared his shoulders, and allowed himself to be taken into custody with the dignity expected of his rank, if not his character. As Montgomery was led away, Frank Reynolds approached Sarah. "What happens now, Captain?" Sarah looked at the Navy Cross still lying on the podium, the medal she had earned but would never wear. Justice, investigation, truth, however painful. "And after," Frank pressed, "what happens to Ghost Eagle 7 when this mission is complete?" It was the same question Reynolds had asked on the Afghan Ridge, the question she had been avoiding since her resurrection from official death. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but for the first time in 3 years I can think about it as a possibility, rather than an impossibility." Reynolds was taken into custody separately, his status complicated by his actions both before and after Black Storm. As he passed Sarah, he paused. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. "The truth at any seats." Sarah considered the question seriously. "Ask me in 20 years, when the cost has been fully paid." 1 week later, Sarah stood before the 15 headstones in Arlington once more. The media storm had been intense but controlled the military closing ranks not to protect the guilty, but to ensure proper process. The council members were being arrested one by one, their network of influence unraveling as evidence emerged. Sarah had testified for 3 straight days, recounting everything from the ambush in Afghanistan to the confrontation at the Pentagon. Her future remained uncertain, hailed as a whistleblower by some, criticized for breaking chain of command by others. "Talking to the dead again, Captain." She turned to find Chen and Frank approaching, both in civilian clothes. The investigation had temporarily suspended their official duties, but not their commitment to seeing justice done. "Just keeping them updated," she replied. "They deserve to know it's over." "Is it?" Chen asked. "Walsh is still at large. 3 council members haven't been located, and the damage assessment is just beginning." "The truth is out," Frank observed. "That's a start, even if it's not an ending." Sarah placed the last eagle pin on the final headstone. "So what's next for the 2 of you?" "Retirement, finally," Frank said with a slight smile. 40 years is enough. Time to let the next generation fix what ours broke." "CIA has offered me a task force," Chen revealed. "Tracking the international connections to the council. Could be years of work." Sarah nodded, understanding the importance of such follow-through. "They've offered me options too: return to active duty, training position at Jefferson, even a desk at the Pentagon, ironically enough." "And," Frank prompted. "I told them I needed time," Sarah said thoughtfully. 3 years of living as a ghost, focused only on vengeance and justice. I need to remember who Sarah Morgan is without that mission." "Whatever path you choose," Frank said, "those 15 would be proud of what you've accomplished, not just exposing the betrayal, but how you did it. Truth, honor, accountability, the values they lived by." "The values worth fighting for," Chen added. "Yes," Sarah agreed, looking across the neat rows of white headstones stretching into the distance. "Those values don't change, even when the people who claim to uphold them do." From the folder she carried, Sarah removed a letter, her official acceptance of the training position at Camp Jefferson. The facility where she'd once been prey would now be where she molded the next generation of operators. Laura Martinez called yesterday. She mentioned, a slight smile touching her lips. "She's accepted my invitation to join the new special training program. Said she wants to learn from the best." "Smart woman," Frank nodded approvingly. As they walked together toward the cemetery gates, Sarah felt a weight lifting that she'd carried for 3 years. Not gone completely, some burdens never fully disappearing, but transformed into something she could carry differently now, a responsibility rather than a crusade. In the parking lot, Chen handed her a secure file. "Latest intelligence? Walsh was spotted in Bangkok 3 days ago. 2 council members with him. Your problem now, Sarah replied, handing the file back. I've chased enough ghosts. You sure? Chen asked. Could be like old times. Sarah shook her head. I've got 20 new recruits arriving Monday. They need to learn that the system can fail, but the values never do. That's my mission now. As Chen's car pulled away, Sarah stood for a moment in the autumn sunlight. Ahead lay a future she'd never planned for, never expected to have. Behind lay the ghosts of fallen comrades, finally able to rest. Ghost Eagle 7 had completed her mission. Now Sarah Morgan could begin hers, teaching a new generation to soar with honor.